about getting full. We don't fill up our houses.
Good morning. We're going to get started. So I apologize first off. Apparently, when we decided there was no Sunday school for today, that was a decision we made and then proceeded to tell no one. So my apologies for people with kids. If you didn't know, that's our fault completely. So but the senior pastor's not here, so I'll blame it all on him. Right? Alrighty, let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you that we're able to come and study your word. We give thanks that you sent your son down as a baby, that you protected him when he was so vulnerable, that what he was able to do, namely his death and resurrection, which gave us life and salvation. What a blessing that is. And we get to celebrate that today, and we get to dive deeper into all that that means. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are now in the New Testament. So we spent the last 4 months in the Old Testament. We're now switching back to the New Testament. So that's where we will be. Fair warning, if you don't like pictures of history, today's Bible study will probably bore you. It's a lot of pictures and a lot of history and background information more than anything. So I'm very excited. So today will be Matthew 2, so it's the wise men. It works out well because Thursday's Epiphany. So, all right, I'm going to read the first 12 verses. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people. He inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophets, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler, who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And after going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So we're actually going to not spend a lot of time in the text today. It's a text we know fairly well. And so I'm going to give a lot of background information towards the end if we get there. Then we'll kind of dive a little bit more into the text. But that's the plan. So background information. So for those of you who are in my first Samuel Bible study, I told you guys 2 Christmas Advent stories. This is the second one. So for them, I told you the first one. The rest of you guys, I guess, have to wait. So the second one is, what you have to understand about the history of Herod is that when he was governor, before he was king, he was governor. And when he was governor in 40 BC, the Persians came down and tried to kick him out. They wanted a foothold in the region. And so they actually succeeded. He was running away from Jerusalem in a chariot, and in another chariot was his mother. And so they were running away, they were fleeing south towards Bethlehem. And they caught up to them, actually caught up to his mom. He turned around and ended up killing the Persians that overtook his mom's chariots. That's where then he eventually created the Herodium, one of his 7 forts. He created 7 forts after that, after he reconquered the place, all a day's journey apart throughout Israel. So that way, if any of this happened again, he would be within a day's journey of a fort. So he would always kind of be safe. Now, the 2 famous ones are Masada and the Herodium. And we'll talk and look at pictures of Masada later. But right now, we'll focus on the Herodium. And this is the modern-day Herodium. So as you can see, it's south. It's right next to actually Bethlehem. And so that's where it is. It's about 8 miles south of Jerusalem. So it's not very far. So this is modern day Jerusalem, just so you can kind of understand where we are. Jerusalem during the time of David would have started here, gone about to here, all the way down in the back and around. There's about 25,000 people during the time of David. As you can see now, it's obviously more modern and the like. To the right would be the temple, even the modern day temple. That's just not in the picture. But you can kind of understand, I'm on the Mount of Olives when I took this picture, so looking down at Jerusalem. So if you look at this, you take a straight left. Just take a 90-degree angle. This is the Herodium back here. This little thing. So you can see it from Jerusalem, and it's now smaller than what it would have been in Jesus' time, so it would have been much bigger then. So everybody would have seen this, and this is 8 miles away. Now what you have to understand, though, is that the story took place of them overcoming his mother's chariot, and he killed them all. That took place here, and it was a flat land. This used to be right here. So he actually moved, and you have to also understand in Israel, a big hill is called a mountain. It's a slightly bigger hill, it's a mountain. So he literally moved a mountain to create this fort. So what's interesting though about that is when Jesus tells his disciples, you will be able to move more than mountains. Like there's actually like a historical thing with Herod moving a mountain to get what he wants. And Jesus is saying you'll be able to do that and more. So you'll be more powerful than Herod. But that's what Herod did. So you can start to understand, right? It's Herod the Great because he did all these wonderful things. He literally moved a mountain because he wanted to. And so that's what he did. So if you get closer, you can kind of see now, it's obviously easily defensible. This is also where he and his mom were buried. So it's obviously a pretty special place to him. We have his mom's ossuary box. We don't have Herod's. We think that's because the Jews kind of desecrated his gravesite after he died, because they didn't really like him. So this used to be much taller, and we'll kind of get there. But you can kind of see leading up, the steps leading up, it's very steep, very defensible. So this is kind of the outline of what it would look like when it actually stood in place. So right here, if you can see this black line, this dotted black line, that's what we see here. That's the uppermost part right there. So you can see that it's much taller than what it stands now. Basically, that's the point. This thing was huge and easily defensible. They figure Herod is probably buried up top here. Which means, though, right, you're Herod the Great, you're a paranoid guy, but you want to show your power. When you die and you're buried on top of this giant thing, even in death, you're overlooking the Jews. You're ruling over them. Right? You can see it from Jerusalem. You can see it from miles. Even in death, you're still the king. Right? King Herod the Great. So then you can see, so this is inside of it. So like, that's where that is. So that, oops, wrong button. So that little stump right there, that's that. So you can see, I mean, this thing's huge. I mean, if you stand here, we might get 2 bricks high. It's a huge thing. Now imagine carrying all these boulders, all these rocks up this mountaintop. And moving this mountain, right? He literally made this mountain because he wanted a fort here. That's what Herod did. Now what's interesting here is right here, these called mitzvos. And I know Pastor talked about purification, washing, and the like in the Jewish law. Those are called mitzvos. So Herod had them within this fort. Now he stayed here in the summer and the like, because up here there's wind. So when it gets high, it can come up and there's wind. But there's mitzvos there. Because Herod liked to pretend, and I have this in a different slide, that he was a Jew. Now he really wasn't. But he wanted to be seen as a practicing Jew because he ruled the Jews, and he wanted to be liked by the Jews because, well, the Jews are known to rebel. And so this is what, Masada will have these also, but we see this all over Israel by Herod, these mitzvot and the like. So that's one of the interesting things here. Also notice, though, all these pillars. So there would have been stuff on top. This also had 3 baths up here. Because the Roman baths, they usually had 3. it was like cold, temperate, and hot, I believe. So this had 3 baths. This had pretty much everything. This is the entrance coming in. So you saw the staircase coming up. This is the entrance coming in. What's interesting is this is still, this is original. This painting right there. So that's 2,000 plus years old. And so one of the things also you have to understand, when we think of like Greek architecture and stuff, we always think of white pillars. Nothing was white in the ancient days. Everything was colored. Like nowadays, we don't usually leave stuff white, we color it. But just because of weathering over time, and he wrote it the color. So everything would have been colored. It's the same thing with all of this. And we'll see the same color scheme at Masada, so obviously Herod must have liked it. But that's original, which is kind of cool. And these are just some of the pillar heads that they found. But you can kind of see how ornate they are, right? And this is just for one of his fortresses. This isn't even, everything else that he built. This is just one of them. They probably had levee systems or something. I don't know for sure. But that and slaves. Yeah. Well, when we look at Masada, this is impressive. What they were able to build in Masada, I think, is probably more impressive. I like the Herodium better than Masada. My dad disagrees. But what they do there is pretty impressive as well. So, like I said, there's a reason here it's called the Great. What he's able to do is simply amazing. But there you can kind of see the temple heads. It also had, and right next to this probably is where his mom was buried, an amphitheater. So in case you wanted a theater, or Herod wanted a theater, you could do it. And you can kind of, it's not a great picture, but you can see you're overlooking the countryside of Bethlehem. So you can have this beautiful open theater and everything. Now, they found his mom's bones right around here. Originally, they thought it was his. And then the guy who found it, he was like in his 70s or something. 2 days later, he slipped and fell and died. Since then, they kind of figured it can't be Herod's because the ossuary box where the bones were, it's not really fancy or ornate. And they're like, there's no way this is Herod's. Even from these few pictures, Herod's, would have been over the top. But they don't want to say because they don't know for sure. And out of respect for the guy who found it and died, they don't want to say he's wrong. But it's probably his mom's. But yeah, so you can even kind of see the different layers still kind of there. This is the steps then going up. So you can kind of see it's pretty steep. They're kind of working on it, constructing it and the like, as you can see. But it's pretty steep. The Israelites did use this in the rebellion in 68. This is one of the places they went to. They went to Masada, and that's where the famous story of Masada comes from. They also went here. Yeah.
So if they found the bones, then did they not find all of them or something? Because wouldn't it make sense you could tell whether it was male or female because of the ribs?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't know the full facts. So like I said, no, it's a good question. And I just don't know. Part of it is I just haven't dove deep enough into it. Like I said, they're pretty sure either way it's his mom's. They just don't want to say out of respect for the guy that it's not Herod's. So, yeah. Yeah. But no, that's a good point. So this is then from the top, overlooking Bethlehem. Where's Kenny? Kenny, you're a shepherd. What do you notice about this? If you're a shepherd. It's hilly, and what else? There's no grass. Right? It's hilly and no grass.
Sheep will ruin your grass.
Sheep will ruin your grass. So, but remember the Christmas story. You have the shepherds who are tilling the flock. And so there's not much grass. And a lot of Israel's like this. Now, the Jezreel Valley by the Sea of Galilee is a little bit different. That's much more green and much more lush. But a lot of Israel is a lot like this. Not much farmland. So if you're a shepherd, you had to travel a long distance each day to find food for your sheep. So it's just an interesting thing to note here. And I'm pretty sure that might actually be Bethlehem. What's also interesting is within all of these hills, there's small caves. So there's a lot of caves in this region. What they did in biblical times was it was not unusual to live in caves until you could build a house. And once you built your house, you built it on top of the cave, then you used the cave for storage. Yeah, in the basement, right? So in the biblical story, when they go to a manger, it was most likely a cave. So it wasn't completely unusual, because that's where you would have kept livestock or anything else. What's interesting, I don't have pictures of it. I do have pictures, just not in here. Is that in Bethlehem there is a Lutheran church, and which would be a really hard place to do ministry because it's mostly Muslim there. But there's a Lutheran church, and they went to expand their basement, and they found a cave that hadn't been touched since the 1st century. So it's kind of interesting. So we went there, had a manger scene and everything. The other interesting thing about this Lutheran church in Bethlehem is it was planted by Germans, so there's blonde Jesus.
Blue eyes, too.
Yeah. You know how many blonde, blue-eyed Jews you see in Israel? Zero. So, in the middle of Israel, you have blonde Jesus.
And so the other story about Gilbert's family, they had to come all the way to South Dakota from the old country to find grass for their sheep. So this is the Herodium, though. And I had done like 100 pictures, so these are just the ones I selected. So this is a magnificent place that you can see from Jerusalem that overlooks Bethlehem. Now you have to understand, remember the Persians came and tried to drive Herod off. That's why this place was built. This is why he was buried here. So the wise men come, and where are the wise men from? Which would be what country? It would be the Persians. Yeah, it would be the Persians. So, about 35 years after they come and try to run him out, these Persians come and say, what? Where is the king of the Jews? Now you have to understand, right? Herod's paranoid as is. He's an old man at this point. He's been paranoid his whole life. He's an old man, though, more paranoid than usual. And so these Persians come and ask him, where's the king of the Jews? What are you thinking, if you're Herod? Oh boy, right? They're coming back to run me out. And now they have found a king that is actually a Jew. And so you begin, it's obviously an overreaction, but you begin to understand then why he did what he did with killing all the babies. Right? Obviously an overreaction. But if you know the story of Herod, it makes sense. These Persians come who have tried to run you out already, asking you where the true king of the Jews is. Right? So, it's kind of cool when you actually understand the historical background of Herod with the Persians and then why he did what he did. The other cool thing then with this is that you can easily compare, and I kind of do this in my sermon, Herod with Jesus, right? You have Jesus who's born in Bethlehem, and right next to Bethlehem is this wonderful monument of what a king should be. Right, you have this giant fortress, he literally moved a mountain, all these things, and then you have little baby Jesus born in a manger. So, it's this great thing. So that's my second Advent story. Any questions about that?
So how long ago were you been up there?
About 3.5 years ago. I went after my first year of seminary. Yeah. So, yeah, it was pretty awesome. I would go back again. Cool. So that's the Herodium. Yeah.
How old was Herod?
So
It's like 69, 70. He's old. Yeah. He's getting up there in age. He's not as young as he once was. Any other questions? Before I, dig my hole a little bit deeper.
Herod ordered the first male baby killed, right?
Yeah.
Is that because just the first ones could become king?
Well, I think he killed all. I think it was all the baby boys. Yeah, 2 and younger. Yeah, all the baby boys 2 and younger. Because Jesus probably would have been about 2 when the Magi came. Yeah, so he's not actually a baby. He's like an infant, toddler, whatever. Yeah. So. He was almost shaking.
That had to have a huge impact on the workers.
Right?
The workers for building stuff for the king.
Yeah. Well, this is not unusual. Well, yeah. Herod's not exactly known for his sanity or niceties. Yeah. And so. Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
He didn't know economics either. You got to have workers.
yeah.
There were smart people back then.
Yeah.
Do we know what probably was become king?
Yeah, so let's go. We'll get there. Oh, okay. So I found this is on the back side of your sheet. I'm really excited that I found this, because this is by far the best family tree of Herod I have ever found. I showed Pastor, I was so excited. So this is Herod the Great. So that's where we start. And so it gives dates. What's awesome about this, because there's a lot of Herods running around in the New Testament, but they're not all the same Herods. And so what's great about this is that it gives you each one. So this Herod imprisoned Peter. This one executed James. So it's great because you can follow it and you can understand then which Herod it is and who did what in the Bible story. So obviously here is Herod the Great, but like the Herod who kills John the Baptist, that's this Herod. Actually, this Herod. Herod Philip. So it's not Herod the Great there. It's a different Herod. The Herod in Acts is a different Herod. So that's what's great about this family tree, is then you begin to see which Herod is which as you go through the Bible. Because it becomes pretty confusing.
And Herod the Great had 6 wives?
Um,
To that, or more?
I think he had 8 total, 7 or 8. Yeah, he had a lot. Yeah, and he had 14 children. So these aren't all his children, just the ones that matter. Well, all those wives had to try to kill somebody. Right? Alrighty, so Herod the Great. So he lived from 73 BC to 4 BC. So what's really interesting, if you begin to think of this from a historical perspective, he lived, during Caesar's time, and all these, the civil war after Caesar died between the 3 triumphants and stuff. So it's pretty awesome. So he was born in southern Palestine, and this is important, because that makes him an Idumean, or Edomite. Who are the Edomites? Who are they descendants of? Yeah, Esau. Remember, because it's Esau and Jacob. Jacob gets the blessing and Esau lives. So he's an Edomite. He's a descendant of Esau. And so what happened is, the second time Israel went into captivity, the Babylonian captivity, is that obviously now there's all this land for the taking, so the Edomites come in. Because they're like, hey, free land. Why not? And so that's what they did. And so that's why he was born in southern Palestine. But he's an Idumean. He's an Edomite. So he's not actually a Jew. He's descended from Esau, which is then why he pretends that he's a practicing Jew, because he's not actually one.
His father, Antipater, was a man of great influence and wealth. His father actually ruled part of Israel himself. So he was born into a family of politicians that had great influence in the area and the like. So it wasn't like he rose from nothing. He came from a pretty prominent family in the area. In 47 BC, he was appointed governor by his dad of the region of Galilee. So in the northern part of Israel, that's where he started. And then in 40 BC, the Parthians, which would be the Persians, and I talked about this, invaded Palestine, and Herod at this point then fled to Rome. After he escaped them, he went to Rome. At Rome, the Senate gave him the title of king, and then gave him an army, and said, "You're king, here's an army, go fight for your land. Have fun." Because they didn't really care. They didn't. It's the outskirts, and like I said in my sermon, Israel at this point and the surrounding region is kind of a backwater place. So here's the army, here's your kingship, and go. In 37 BC, he became the undisputed king of Judea. So it took him about 3 years to finally get them all out, but by that point, everybody recognized him as king. And then he died roughly 4 BC, 2 BC, it's around there. Dates there, and always you can give a year or two. So yeah, so that should answer your question, does it? Cool. So that's Herod the Great's life in an overview there. What's interesting is his second life, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that today, was a Hasmonean princess. What's interesting about this was, remember the Maccabean revolts. If you know your history between the Old and the New Testament, the Israelites come back, and then they revolt against the Babylonians. That's the Maccabean revolt, which succeeds, and they kind of had their own quasi-kingdom for about 100 years, so the Romans come in, and Herod in 37 BC, and kind of says, yeah, that's over. And so what he does, though, from the ruling family, which would be the Hasmoneans, he marries one of their daughters. So from a political move, it's pretty shrewd. You're coming in to be king now, you're now king, you're not a Jew, but you're going to marry a Jew from the ruling family. So that's just kind of interesting thing to know. So Herod's crazy, he's paranoid, but he knows what he's doing, and he knows what it takes to be king. That part's pretty obvious. So this is I find this interesting. So Herod then was an Edomite with a Greek name. He didn't have a Jewish name, a Greek name. He was an Edomite put in place by the Romans to rule over the Jews. Kind of interesting. At least I think so. Edomite with a Greek name put in place over the Romans, ruled over the Jews. Like I said, he was a practicing Jew. It's really interesting because the Jews had kind of like this love-hate relationship with him, because sometimes they loved him and sometimes they just hated him. And so sometimes, you might lower taxes for them. It's really interesting, just the dynamics between the two of them, the Jews and Herod, during these times. So he built, like I said, 7 forts. The two most famous ones, Masada and the Herodium. 3 temples to Caesar. I think only 1 stands today, which I went to. Even that's a ruin. That was actually really interesting because they found that there's a path. And they're like, don't deviate from the path because they didn't clear the mines. So like there's mines out there someplace, so don't walk. The path is clean, but the rest of it we don't know. I'm like, that's fair, I'm not going to deviate. His other claim to fame, which I have pictures from but not today, is Caesarea Maritime. Now this was a city before he got there, but I mentioned this in my sermon. He basically makes this into one of the biggest ports in the Roman Empire. He literally, they put bricks. They basically had a man-made harbor that he did. They put these giant bricks that are still there today into the Mediterranean Sea. It's this wonderful thing that he did. So he basically made it his own seaport. And then, as I also mentioned, there's a 5-mile aqueduct that connects this to the other city by there. Parts of it still stand today. So that's a pretty long aqueduct even for them. And so what he did with these buildings, and I'll have pictures of Masada then, is really nothing, kind of, as I said, short of amazing. He built all these wonderful things in about 40 years. Yeah, so it was very quick. I think Masada took 7 years to build only, which when you see it, even the ruins, is like 7 years is pretty quick.
So obviously he had to like generate the money for that, right?
Yeah, so part of it is, so he also, he made it into a giant trade port. Part of it is the salt. They could get salt. Part of it's from the Dead Sea, part of it's from the Sea of Galilee. Salt's a very big commodity because that's how you preserve food. So you can get that salt from there and ship it over to Rome. So that's part of it. Fishing. They had a lot of fish. Like you always have, Peter and the like, the disciples, a lot of them were fishermen. So they could ship fish. The other big thing was, this was a few months ago when we talked about the Carthage and the Phoenicians. Right, they had dyes and purple dyes, which was of course famous in Rome. So you can use those and ship those. So part of what he did is he made the infrastructure so that way they could actually start shipping these stuff overseas, mainly back to Rome. And that's how he got a lot of this money.
So he kind of just like was like, hey, I'm gonna build this and then we're gonna pay it back.
And he taxed the Jews. Yeah. So that's part of the reason they didn't like him. Yeah. So that's how he got a lot of this money.
The biggest cost is always labor.
Yeah.
That's free, so.
Yeah, when you have slave labor, it helps out. Yeah. You just got to get the stuff over and from there. So, yeah, but good question. Anything else? Then we'll go to Masada. Alrighty, so Masada, as you can see over here, is right by the Dead Sea. We'll also see that it's even drier than Bethlehem, which is saying something. Just for notes of reference, this doesn't really deal with our story. All of this over here is attributed to the land of Judah, the tribe of Judah. Their land, they get a giant chunk, and it's just awful. It is desert. You can't grow anything there, so we like to joke around, well, it's a good thing they got the promise because they didn't get anything else. So this is an overview of Masada. I don't have a great picture to see how far up it is, but it's, as you can see, it's on a plateau. So it's easily defensible, even more so than the Herodium. But we'll be here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's these three layers, there's three like temples, and that's kind of where Herod would have had his throne and the like. And then just up here was a living place, you would have had baths. They had an aqueduct system or a cistern, so that way they could get water. That's why the Jews in the rebellion was able to outlast the Romans for so long, because they had fresh water up there. So they had that, so if Herod, because it was meant to be a fort. So you can see that's kind of all these things up here, and then towards this, there's not much. But once again, easily defensible, and it's up on this giant cliff. It's all in rock. So you can kind of see that it's hilly, all these rocky hills around. There's not much there, but you can see these ruins. These are all ruins. You can kind of see these would have been maybe houses, because of course there would have been servants there, places to eat and the like. And this is another good picture. You can see that obviously this I think Dead Sea over here, but there's not much else. It's a pretty barren place. But you can see these are still ruins. These aren't reconstructed or anything. These are still taking place from about 2,000 years ago. So this, because naturally it's going to be Herod, and you might stay here. You need a bath. So what this was is they would have water under here, and then there would be these platforms on top. And so that's how you kind of got water underneath. You heated up the water and the like, and then the steam would run through these pipes. And these pipes are still original. Most of them have fallen off, as you can see. But then they would run these water and steam through these pipes to heat up the water throughout the rest of the houses and the like. Which is interesting, because I climbed this about like 5:30 in the morning, and it was 82 degrees out. So I don't know why they would want hot water. And that's coming from me. But But that's where they're like, so some of these houses were bathhouses, and this is kind of the infrastructure and the technology that they had to make sure that they had these waters up. So very lavish and the like for a fort, yeah. So I showed you those 3 pillars. This is, we're at the bottom one. But you can see how high this goes. And obviously there would have been stuff coming out. You can see the pillars. And this is all carved into stone. So either they had to bring the stone up, or they had to carve it out already. So it's pretty amazing, because like I said, this was it's a hike to get up there. So you can also see down here, the bottom, you see that same color that you saw in the Herodium. Still there. Like still, that's the original from, 2,000 years ago, still there. So
How did they develop the steam?
how? They had, I think, a furnace or a fireplace that would have done it. I don't know for sure. Yeah. My older brother would probably know. He's much more into Roman stuff than me. Yeah, but I don't know. So and then once again, you see these pillars. You can kind of see the arches as well. So this is just a close-up picture of this. They redid some of the painting, which is this. So this is kind of the color scheme and what it actually would have looked like in Herod's day. It's a very colorful. You can actually kind of see it matches really well with the background, I think. But so everything would have been colorful. You have all these like giant pillars and the like. In this really hilly mountain place. And so he probably did this for most of his forts. I guess if you're going to be held up in a fort, you might as well have luxuries. As in my sermon from a week and a half ago, it's good to be king. I think. So what's interesting then, in this you can really see how barren the land is. It's all rocks and hills. This is when the Romans encamped during the Jewish rebellion. They set up these camps, around. And so you have these imprints. These are still imprints from the Roman camps. Now this one was probably the commander's camp, because you have this little insert here where the commander would have been. All the other ones were smaller, and so this one was bigger. But you can see that these Roman camps surrounding Masada, which is really, really interesting. That's that. I think that's my last picture of Masada.
I have the whole movie of Masada and how they built it.
Do you?
I want to show that.
Interesting.
And how the armies came and they tried to build a ramp
Yep,
up
yep.
to the top of it. And it was just, you can't imagine how high it is. I mean, we took what? It was a ski lift across there, but what are they called?
Yeah.
I mean, you had to
Tram.
ride on something.
Yeah, so we hiked
Get
up.
there.
Yeah, we hiked up in the morning, and then we came back down for breakfast, and we took the trail up. And it took about 45, 50 minutes of just walking the trail just to get up there. And they don't, after 10 o'clock in the morning, they don't let anybody walk up the trail because it's so hot. So you figure, imagine the Romans then trying to scale. That's why they lasted for so long, the Jews up there. Yeah, so it's very defensible. Yeah, there's a reason he picked this place. And then what he did on top of that was pretty awesome. So yeah, it's very high up.
So they captured the rainwater by the cisterns.
Yeah, and they probably took water somehow found a way to get water from the sea and take the salt out of it. Yeah, I don't know all exactly what they did, but...
They also had, trenches all the way around this big mountain, so when it would rain, it would catch all this water and it would be brought into certain places to be kept too. And it's just very interesting.
Right, yeah, and like I said, so like the Herodium was built, this was built all at the same time within 40 years. I mean, the Caesarea Maritime. So this is Herod.
It's amazing, the talent.
Yeah.
I don't think they could do that now.
Well, see, in this, I talked about this, I know in confirmation I talked about this. I think I brought it up here with the Sumerians. This whole notion of progress, that we're always making progress, we're always getting better. You see stuff like this, and it just flies in the face of what we consider progress. Even the Parthenon, the engineering there is phenomenal, down to the degrees that they, And so it just flies in the face of this whole progress, evolving thing that's going around today. But yeah. So any questions about Herod at all? The pictures. So I either thought this Bible study was going to take about 30 minutes or we're going to go over. We're going to go over. It was one of those things I didn't know which one it was going to be. Alrighty, so that's Herod. That's the background of Herod, all the stuff he did. Now we're going to kind of dive into Zoroastrianism. Because this is what the wise men, not wise men, the Magi, what the Magi would have practiced. Around the 6th century, we kind of get this whole thing of, instead of Magi, they were wise men, they were, believers. That's not really the case. Nowhere do we kind of see that at all in the scriptures. In fact, they're pagans. They're probably practicing pagans. That's what they were. So Zoroastrianism, it was founded by Zoroaster, which is his Greek name, or Zarathustra. And so I'm just going to call him Zarathustra for now. He's believed to be a contemporary of Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great died in 530 BC. He was the one that allowed the Jews to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. That's Cyrus the Great. Now, there are questions about, some people date Zarathustra around 1200 BC. So there's questions about when did he actually live. Is it 1200 BC? Is it around 530 BC? People don't really know. That's kind of the thing people argue with. But we're going to go with the 530 BC because that's what most people believe. Most of what's known of him comes from the Avesta, which is the religious book, one of the religious books of Zoroastrianism. So that's how we know most of what of Zarathustra. He also inspired the Chaldean doctrines of astrology and of magic. Zoroastrianism itself doesn't really deal much with astrology and magic, but the Persians and the like are famous for that. So they kind of go hand in hand, but not really. They go hand in hand because where Zoroastrian started, they're famous for that also, but the religion itself doesn't dive too deep into that. Alrighty, so with most origin stories of religions, he had a divine vision of his supreme being while partaking in a pagan purification rite at the age of 30. So he had this vision. I don't actually know what the purification rite was. It would be kind of interesting. I don't know what it was. His vision was that there was a single god called Ahura Mazda. Before this, they kind of were, worshiping a lot of different gods, like pretty much everyone does besides Judaism at this point. What he had this vision of and what he taught was that there was one God, Ahura Mazda. So some of the concepts of Zoroastrian include a single God, like I said, a heaven and a hell, a day of judgment. So all of this we pretty much agree with, right? Now obviously we want to agree that the single God is Ahura Mazda. But we agree there's one God, that there's a heaven and a hell, a day of judgment. So there's a lot of tenets that are similar to what we believe in that respect. So what's really annoying is all these things I read about Zoroastrianism, like all of them are like, yeah, so it probably influenced Judaism and Christianity. Never mind the fact that historically speaking it doesn't make sense. Because even if you go with the 1200 BC route, to put that into perspective, 1200 BC is about the time of the Exodus. But everybody, even historians, agree that the Exodus, that Judaism, started with Abraham. So thousands of years beforehand. So how Zoroastrianism then influenced Judaism just doesn't make sense. Kind of frustrates me. Like maybe it was the other way around. But just so you know, that's what people say, that because of these tenets that are similar between us and them.
Okay, so with
Ahura Mazda.
Okay, so what does that actually mean? What follows before their God? Because I
So, continuing on, this will answer your question. There's a dichotomy between good and evil in the religion. We call this dualism. So there's good and there's evil. And so we say there's good and evil, but for them it's kind of like the yin-yang. There's good and there's evil. And so the world was created by Ahura Mazda so that the two forces could engage with one another. So it's kind of this battle between good and evil, like who will win, kind of forces like that. The final and definitive defeat of evil is at the end of time and the restoration of the world to its once perfect state. That's what they believe. And then there is an afterlife, which is determined by your actions while on earth. So that's one of the differences, one of the big differences, is that there's good and evil. They say good's going to win, but it's this battle between the two, and it's kind of like, it's very similar if you know Norse mythology. There where they're kind of fighting the evil, and where for us, we say, yeah, there's good and evil, because the devil, but at all times, God is in control. For the Zoroastrianism, it's not quite that way. And even if, obviously they believe that, good's going to win, but that doesn't determine if you're going to go to heaven or hell. What determines is your actions.
Do you ever think that maybe he really did have a vision of
He could.
But then he
Well, so this is the same, it could be the same thing with Muhammad. He could have had a vision. Now Joseph Smith probably not, because he just copied off Muhammad. Because Mormonism is just straight off, rip off Islam. But the thing is, you could have these visions. And so even today, you can have these visions. And you have these visions, what do you do for us Christians? You pray and you check the scriptures. If it goes against the scriptures, then you know for sure it's not from God. It's from the devil, it's from an evil spirit, but it's not from God. So you very well could have had these visions.
And then just was like, oh, let's make up all this other stuff about it too.
Yeah, so who knows? So or these visions told him what to do. So he could have had these. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So yeah. But for us, when we have these things, that's what we do. We check the scriptures. Does it actually go against the scriptures? Well, then we know for sure this is not from God.
And say the practical thing when you have a vision is to wake up.
To wake up, yeah, right? Well, here's the other interesting part with going off that, is that it is semi-similar to Judaism, right? You have all these things that are the same, but it differs in dramatically wild ways. But if you're the devil, right, one of the great things is, why not create the same thing close to it, but twist it? Because it might be, the law that's written in your heart says, this kind of sounds good, but it's not quite true. So very well he could have had a vision, a true vision. Yeah. Anything else?
They also can somewhat attribute that some of these visions, because of the metal they wore, when they used it, a lot of their tools and hard surfaces were made out of lead. So they're not certain if he was actually
Hallucinating?
right.
Well, see, that's what I said. It would be interesting because I don't know his purification rite, what that actually entailed. Because here, with Native Americans, you have sweat lodges and stuff. So I don't know what it entailed. So like hallucinations, was an actual, we don't know. Did he just make it up on the spot? He could have. We don't know. But this is what we do know is what he taught. So, yeah. So it's very similar in a lot of different ways, like the tenets are. Now, once you actually dive into the tenets, it's very much different. So they have some symbols. The Faravar, however you pronounce that, that's this image. I'm sure you guys all probably have seen it at some point in your lives. And so you can see wings going in each direction. You kind of have the sun right there in the middle and the like. That's one of their images. Fire is the big one in Zoroastrianism. Represents light, warmth, and has purification powers. Where do we see, this is interesting, because you kind of see some similarities with this. Part of it's just because it's fire. But where do we see fire in the same way in the Bible?
Sacraments.
Sacraments in what way?
I mean, not the sacraments, I mean the sacrifices.
Sacrifices, okay.
good. I didn't even think about that one. So you have the sacrifices, because there you kind of get the, not just in the warmth, but the purification through the sacrifices. Good. Where else?
Presence of God.
The presence of God, you get the fire there. Good. What? We're in the water. So in baptism, because of the purification. Okay. Where else?
The Methodists use fire as their symbol.
Why? Because there's two, there's two big ones we're missing. And they use it probably because of Pentecost. Pentecost, there it says like fire. So there technically isn't fire, it's like fire. But there we have fire with purification. And then the big one, the last day. God will use fire to purify and wipe clean and start over with the new creation, new heaven, new earth. So we kind of use the same thing for purification and the like. It's interesting to kind of know that. The evergreen cypress tree also. That represents eternal life, which is then interesting because we also then, when I think about trees and representations, we have the tree of, in the garden we have the tree of life, but then we also have the cross, which is also a tree. I think one of the hymns actually touched on that today, about the tree of life and the cross. So we kind of get some similarities there with the tree representing eternal life. Okay. I have a really bad sense of humor, or a sick sense of humor, because you'll see why. So the worship, they worship in, sometimes it's called fire temples, which makes sense because of the symbol of fire. Fire is a big thing for them, so they sometimes worship in fire temples. You'll also see this in California a little bit. There's not too many Zoroastrians left. There's a few in India. I think the number they figure is about 200,000 or so, but there's some in California, some in India, but fire temples. According to their legend, there are 3 ancient Zoroastrian fire temples. This is just the Zoroastrian legend. And these 3 fire temples, Ahura Mazda came down and gave them this fire, and so these fire temples had the original fire. That's just the legend, just so you kind of know. Here's why I had a bird. They had sky burials. So this is actually a tomb. This is what they did. This is kind of a tomb, and they would put these bodies in this tomb after somebody died, and then they just let them up for a year, let the vultures have a go at the body, and then they would come back and then collect the bones. So that's what they practice, is a sky burial. So that's kind of also what they're famous for.
So the Vikings or the Norse people had Valhalla?
Yeah.
Sent their bodies on a Viking ship and lighted
Yeah.
as a funeral pier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, you have all these different funeral rituals, and for them there's these sky temples. So that's what they practice. So today's culture, this was interesting. Freddie Mercury, who was in, Queen, his dad was a Zoroastrian. And in fact, at Freddie Mercury's funeral, a Zoroastrian priest did it. That was kind of interesting. The namesake of Mazda Motor Company. And this was because, as the founder put it, they hoped that the association with the god of lights would brighten the image of their first vehicles. So kind of interesting. Well, we might make it through. We'll be quick. Any questions about Zoroastrianism? That's a brief overview. I don't know too much more about Zoroastrianism. But this is what the Magi probably would have believed. The other interesting part was, remember the Israelites were in the Babylonian captivity, so they would have been surrounded by this. So kind of like us being surrounded by other things that are unchristian, this is what the Jews would have been also. So it just kind of gives you some more flavor into the Old Testament times.
Okay, so if the Magi believed all this, why did it lead them to Jesus?
So they also practice.
Okay.
We're going. Remember, So Zoroastrian itself was not really into astrology and stuff, but they did practice that. They were very much into astrology. And so they saw the star that followed them. So they were curious, part of why they did this. So they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And what you have to understand is these are all gifts that any king would have received. So they obviously saw this star, they were curious, and they noticed, though, that this was a king. Now, Paul didn't understand the significance of Jesus and who he actually was. And so they did bring him gifts, though, fit for a king. And this is part of the problem that with modern day of, these are like Jewish kings coming from far off lands to worship him. Look at these gifts they bring him, only gifts for like baby Jesus. Not true. We see gifts like this in the Old Testament times given, I think, to Solomon of gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. These are gifts you would give to a king. So they recognized that. They didn't, I don't think, recognize the significance. So that's probably why they followed him, because they saw the star, they were curious, and they knew it was something special.
If they were then warned by God and afraid not to go back, do you think that would change their view on how they believe?
Maybe. We've talked about this in 1 Samuel a little bit too. We have all these things, God gives them visions, God does all these things. With the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark gets captured, God manipulates his way through the, I can only think of Palestine, Philistine army, right? He causes boils, probably the bubonic plague, and yet the Philistines don't believe in him. So, it could change their hearts, but at the same time, might not be. So we don't know. But we shouldn't be shocked if it doesn't. We should be shocked that it doesn't. At the same time, we shouldn't be shocked that it doesn't.
Well, they may not know that it was the true God either. They
Right.
might believe it was their God telling them.
Right? And probably like any person during this time, outside of a good practicing Jew, you probably still worshipped other gods. Yeah. So. No, good question though. So it shows that Magi genuine, limited understanding and faith of what is happening. Here's the other part. They're never kings. We get this notion once again that they were kings. Nowhere in the text does it say they're kings. In fact, we'll see this in Daniel 2, which will be this next part. And throughout, the king will call for his advisors, his magi, and the like. So they're never kings. It's just this whole thing of trying to upplay this thing with them coming and make it more spiritual than it is. So in Daniel 2, we see here, so the king is talking, and he has the magi, his advisors, and they're confused, they don't know what to do, and they admit, there are no wise men among us, we should go and fetch them. The point being is that they weren't the wise men of the time. They weren't, these are the wise people that you go to for wisdom. That's not the point of the Magi during this time. So why we call them wise men is just because we want to puff them up into what they're doing. Also, what's interesting, we call them wise men, but they're extremely foolish for two reasons in our story. First, they go to Herod and say, "Where's the king of the Jews?" You would think they would know the history between them, and Herod. Apparently they don't. The second one is, God has to warn them not to go back to Herod. So they're not exactly wise in our story either. Alrighty. So that's that. We got to the end. 10:32, not bad. Not bad. Any question about anything we covered? Like I said, it deals with Genesis. It deals with Matthew 2. Just not exactly with the text. It gives you background information and everything else. So any questions, comments? Yeah.
Can you go back on the screen where you have that picture up there? It looked like an eagle with the wings out.
Yep.
Is that the same one that the Nazis used on their banners when they were trying to wipe out the Jews? If you watch any history on the Nazis, they have that same banner on when they're flying over every time Hitler was talking. That same insignia on there.
I don't know.
But they don't have the sun around the neck of the...
Okay, it looks just like that though.
Okay.
On their
Yeah,
banner.
I'll look. That's interesting. I'll have to look at that. Yeah. Anything else? Also, let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.